right, so welcome to the second episode of Fearless Fundraising Podcast, a podcast for founders to understand the game of fundraising from stories and insights shared by founders, thought leaders, and investors who have successfully raised capital or have been in the game of raising capital. I'm your host, Jamal Ahmad Khan, founder of Stellar Consultancy, a cap raising advisory firm helping tech and real estate founders raise capital. Today, I'm joined by someone who, to be honest, I've been following him for a while on LinkedIn, and I can say this for sure. He does not sugarcoat the startup journey. And frankly, we need more of that. Phil is here with me, who's a startup scaling advisor, board advisor, and the author of AngelThink, a must read guide and a book for founders who want to understand how investors really think. He has over 17 plus years of experience helping founders who don't want to be the most. Phil works with hundreds of startups to tackle scaling, self awareness, investor readiness, and relentless execution. So, today we are going to primarily discuss as to what really separates exceptional founders from the rest and why most founders are not able to raise, they don't scale, and they don't succeed. And honestly, what do we do about it? So, Phil, welcome to the show, and let's jump right into it. You do say on your LinkedIn and also on your social media channels that most founders fail, most can't raise, and most can't scale. So why is that? What are the patterns that you see in these most of these founders?
So many, I think. I think if you kind of divide the world into ideas that are worth investing in and people that are worth investing in, you're trying to get that right chemistry between those two things. A great idea delivered by a very backable founder. I certainly hear VCs say this a lot, and I hear angels say it less often, but they do say it, that most often they want to back the person more than the idea. That doesn't mean they'll back stupid ideas, but what it really means is that they want to back people, exceptional people. So if you're failing, 9 out of 10 startups fail within 5 years or so. It's quite likely that you chose an idea that just didn't have scale potential, but it's just as likely that you weren't absolutely committed to this right from the beginning. You're lacking a certain amount of resilience or belief in your idea. You thought you'd try it out, and after a year or so, it didn't quite work out. So you quit and go on with something else in your life.
Interesting. Interesting. And based on these particular characteristics, on the flip side of things, what about those founders? You did mention that, only 4% of the founders actually hit that $1 million in annual recurring revenue. So what are the different factors and what are the different characteristics in these founders from, the 96% of the remaining others?
I think when I look at founders, it's very easy to get sucked into is to start listing a whole load of attributes that are the perfect founder. And then you get a list of so many that you think, well, nobody is like this. Nobody can do all of these things. Nobody is, superhuman, wears their pants outside their trousers, for example. So I tend to kind of boil it down into probably four things that I think are really important. One is their self-belief, belief in themselves and belief in their idea. What they think the world needs, and they've done enough talking to the market to kind of be convinced that this is what the market needs, and they're willing to back themselves. Second, I talk about courage, that you have to be willing to make a really big bet on yourself. You have to back yourself for pretty much anyone else. Third, I talk about, that sense that, a lot of people use, and they use various words: grit, determination, tenacity, the kind of, always being able to get up after you've been knocked back. It doesn't matter if you've been knocked down 9 times, so long as you get up 10 times, you're still there. And the fourth, which I think people talk about less often, is a kind of spiritedness, a kind of inner energy, a drive, a kind of relentlessness, that you're always positive, optimistic, driven, by your idea and what you're trying to do. And that probably incorporates, an element of passion, purpose for what you feel. So I think, if that kind of basket, if you like, of attributes that you find in a few people, is probably what keeps them going. If you're going to get into what helps them get beyond $1 million ARR, 5 million, $10 million ARR, then of course they've got to have a great idea and they've got to have a solution, that's a kind of burning level problem, a pain that the market really wants. And they've got to get towards, people talk about product market fit as if it's just, easy to explain. But I think what people don't talk about when they talk about product market fit is this idea of brand. That product, alongside getting to product market fit, I think people have started to think about building a community, building a tribe, building something that people want to be part of, want to be recognized as being part of. And you can go back and look at, say, Apple phones, iPad products, or whatever. People, a lot of people are proud to identify with the fact that they will buy, a particular brand, and that gives a strength to, ongoing growth.
Interesting. Perfect. And when you say that, most of these founders who have this relentless pursuit of actually chasing the dream and having all these four characteristics that you do mention over here, I also want to highlight that any founder can have some sort of these characteristics, right? But
Yeah,
sometimes founders are delusional. They might be chasing an idea which is not practical. They might be chasing a product which is not really needed in the world. So when is that inflection point where they might have to pivot, where they might have to, despite having all the characteristics and passion and the all the good characteristics that we have, what is that
yeah,
inflection point where they might have to pivot, change the business, or let go of the business altogether?
yeah. So when is it?
Yep. What are those indications, or when
Yeah,
exactly is that move?
I'd say a couple of things. I'd say, I mean, sometimes founders get really excited about trying to build an idea, but what they haven't done enough of at the beginning is identify that there are probably pretty adequate solutions out there for the problem they're trying to solve already. And they put in a lot of energy trying to recreate something that people are unlikely to switch from because it requires a lot of energy to switch from something you're already using. So you might take, for example, a lot of mental health, well-being type apps where people are quite happy using something, and then someone comes along and says, "I want to build something in this space," and a lot of people that want that are already subscribed to something else. I think often founders don't have a good appreciation themselves of the reasons why businesses fail. And I think, I was talking to a colleague about this last week. In the space we've just been talking about, sometimes the reason why a business fails is because it requires too much of the customer in terms of changing their own behavior. They're quite happy in their own bubble, their own rut, their own path, that even though they've got a problem, it's not burning enough for them to invest in changing their behavior to adopt the solution that you've got. So as a founder, you're trying to sell something, and it's just, I think it's Peter Thiel says in 0 to 1, if you come up with an idea or a product, it's not good enough for it to be just a bit better than something else. It has to be 10 times better. And that's, what does 10 times better mean? But it has to be significantly better to persuade people to take it on, to switch, and so on. And then you realize that you're not getting the kind of traction that you imagined that you'd getting. You're investing a lot of money in different marketing channels. It's not getting the return on investment that you wanted. And investors are, you might think, well, I can raise some more money. And then investors will say, well, when you came to us a year ago and said you wanted to raise, and we gave you the money then, and you said you were on this trajectory, and now it looks like you're on this trajectory. Why should we give you more money? Because, you haven't lived up to our expectations. So you either pivot, as you suggest, or you bite a really tough bullet and say, this isn't going anywhere, and you just, cut it.
Interesting. And you did give a reference around, raising capital from your previous investors when the earlier story was that, we are on a upward trajectory, but now you're raising a second round where, let's say, the growth is not there or it's almost stagnant. But what strategy or what story or what narrative or what positioning a founder needs to adopt to raise capital, especially when they have raised capital on an upward inflection, but now they are either stagnant or they're going down or they are almost standstill.
The thing I think that you've got to have faith in, this is where your your belief comes from in the first place, is that you began raising this money to grow this business because you had a vision of what would change in the world. 10 years away, 15 years away, whatever, it would get to this size. There was this amount of need. You'd done a reasonable amount of analysis to say there is an obtainable market of these people. And if that stacked up well at the time, then you need to be able to say to investors, we in our company, we still believe the need is there. We still believe that this vision is attainable, that it's possible. This is the feedback we're getting. The problems we're running into might be things like it takes longer for people to convert than we anticipated. We end up pitching to them 6 times instead of twice before they're actually persuaded, but we get there in the end. So if you can back that up with things like once they bought a product, the churn is very low, and we've still got good testimonials. We've got a few people that are acting as ambassadors for the business. Then that might give investors some hope to follow on. If you haven't got those kinds of things, if you haven't got that kind of collateral, then a point will come. We said at the beginning, 9 out of 10 founders fail. You might be on the failing trajectory.
Makes sense. Makes sense. You also talk a lot about self-awareness in a founder, right?
Yeah,
And it's a very hard pill to swallow, especially when you have big dreams, big vision that you're going to change the world. It's a very hard pill to swallow that you are failing.
yeah.
What it does to your mind, and how can founders battle that phase psychologically, and how do they bounce off this particular point and do something better with their life or with their product or their business?
Yeah, yeah. I say to founders and other people, I've heard them say the kind of worst feeling that you can have when you have a startup idea is not trying it, is thinking about when you get older, living with the regret of not actually pursuing an idea and seeing if you could do it. So I think you can give yourself a certain level of comfort by saying, at least I tried, I had a go, I tried to prove other people that I got it in me or whatever. And not doing that, I think, is probably worse than trying and it not working out. Having said that, if your business fails, it doesn't mean that you're a failure, because, a lot of people pick themselves up, get back in the saddle, have another go, come up with a successful idea, maybe fail twice, maybe fail 3 times, and then come up with a successful idea. Those people are the people with the right mindset that probably are cut out to be entrepreneurs. It's the people that fail, that sort of fail once, walk away, go and get a job and give it up, that probably didn't have the right mindset at the beginning. They weren't cut out to be the right people. They weren't cut out to be exceptional founders in the first place. I think there are probably other things that people need to be aware of about themselves, and that is their own mental health, well-being, risk of burnout, exhaustion, trying to burn the candle at both ends, when to take a rest, when they're losing friends, building a support network around themselves. Because it can be a real struggle, it can be very lonely, and you find yourself in a group of people, and what's going on in your mind all the time is your business, and it makes it difficult for people to switch off for an hour or so and try and socialize and get on anybody else's wavelength. So I think that awareness about yourself is valuable to you.
And as a matter of fact, I was actually having a conversation with the founder who has been working for, I believe, months without taking a break. And
Yeah.
he was at a point where, he was completely exhausted. He didn't have any bandwidth to actually work on the business. And he reached out to me that, it's not working. And I told him that, look, you need to take a break. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity for you, especially in this particular phase. And I believe in those moments of breaks, when you self reflect, when you introspect, that is when you realize certain gaps or certain loose points within your own business that you might have not been aware of, especially when you're going full throttle in one direction and
Yeah.
all eyes
Yeah.
closed. So yeah, taking breaks and being more self-aware and being more cognizant of all the things that are happening around, that really goes a long way. Perfect. Let's talk about fundraising. And let's talk
Okay.
about fundraising from an angel's investor's point of view, because you do angel invest occasionally. I
Yeah.
would love to understand what exactly is your thesis and how an angel investor thinks differently when it comes to, in comparison to, VC investors or institutional investors.
Yeah. Okay. I wouldn't say I have a kind of tightly nailed down thesis. My background is health. I've spent 30 years of my earlier career in our health sector. But I got into angel investing about 15 years ago, 17 years ago. I discovered this thing called angel investing existed. I didn't know it was there. I got a corporate job, and then I was offered redundancy, and I was at a loose end. I found in the city I lived in, Cambridge, there was an angel group, and I thought, I'll go along and see what that's all about. Never heard about it. And I got hooked on the idea that people could come along and tell stories about great ideas, and if only they had, 250,000 quid, they could make this happen in the world, and they would, create great riches for their investors and so on. Of course, that didn't quite come to pass, but it was a nice story at the time. But I think what I learned from, I was a member of an angel group for about 8 years. What I learned from that is that the group, certain things happen in the group which I wasn't really aware of at the time. There's often a kind of group think forms around a certain business and a certain founder that's often influenced strongly by the most senior members in the group. And other people think, oh, well, if Johnny likes this business, then probably I should like this business. And if Johnny's going to be investing, then, maybe I should put a bit of money in because he knows what he's doing or knows what he's talking about. And to some extent, that kind of influences the due diligence that goes on. There's a biasing, if you like, because maybe certain key members in a group will follow, a certain proposal, a certain founder. And I probably wasn't aware, as I have subsequently been, about the importance of doing your own due diligence and the importance of making your own judgment about the people that you're investing in. Because often they come along, pitch, it's a 10-minute pitch, they go away, somebody else does the due diligence for you, and then they say, who's in on the round? And you think, well, I'll put a few £1,000s into that. And you think, well, when I look back at it afterwards and they failed, I think I only met this person once for 10 minutes, So what, when I look back at it now, I think this is bizarre. A VC would never do that. You'd get met 4 or 5 times for, hours at a time, and there'd be such a lot of, scrutiny going on about. So, yeah, I think angels, I wouldn't lump them all together under one umbrella. Sometimes angels can be a bit on the gullible side, I suppose, in terms of, following a good idea. But then you might say, well, VC follow hot topics, hot trends. If you've got AI in your pitch, for example, people will throw money at you. And last year or the year before, it was crypto or fintech or something. But in terms of differences, I think angels probably they get in earlier, they take on higher risks, they might do a bit less due diligence, they might be a bit more impulse driven, than a VC would be. And they're persuaded, I guess, by people that want to try and build a rapport with them, where the chemistry feels, pretty good, and you can see getting to trust and so on. And VCs they're a long way from getting it right every time, aren't they? Like they invest in 1% of people, and then they maybe put 20 founders into a fund, and then they follow the power law, and 2 of the 20 in the fund, do 10x or more, and the rest of them just amble along, or some of them fail as well. So it's difficult investing whoever you are. Now you're on mute.
Sorry.
Okay.
Perfect. So when it comes to the fact that most of the angel investors might be investing where they might have, some good chemistry with the founders, or they might be resonating with the founders or being aligned on their story when whatever has been presented, what sort of approach and what sort of mindset should a founder have before approaching an angel investor? I mean, is this chemistry something that can be built upon by understanding their thesis, or is this something that comes, I mean, naturally, and it goes from, case to case?
I'd say it goes back to the attributes I mentioned at the beginning. You have to be really positive about, what it is you're trying to build. I was talking to some people that were submitting bids for grants the other day, and some people would write in a grant, something fairly um, woolly, I suppose. It is our intention to, our aim will be to, whereas what you really want to say is something absolutely definite, like, I will, just be absolutely firm. Our business is founded on this, in this sector, being broken, and we are going to build the best solution to this problem in the next few years to give um, people in that sector the best experience from using our product. We are going to transform an industry even, and I think you can go a bit overboard with too many cliches about it being disruptive and life changing and groundbreaking and all of that. But if you don't inject that level of confidence into what you're doing, then why would anybody else believe you if you can't do it yourself?
Hmm. True, true. So it all comes down to having that confidence and clarity and conviction within your own story, whatever you're pitching and whatever you're presenting
Yeah,
to the angel
yeah.
investors. Perfect. So, all right. So let's talk about your book, Angel Think, where you mentioned that most founders are not really aware of how angel investors typically think before they actually invest. Walk us through what are the two or three most major disconnects between the psychology of angel investors and the founders, and how do we bridge those particular gaps?
Yeah, I'm just going to flash the book on the screen there. It's available on Amazon if anybody's interested. The few things that I think are, I'm just going to kind of refer to it. The few things that I think are, when I sat down to write this book, I wrote it during lockdown, during COVID. I didn't know how much time I'd have, when I couldn't really go and meet people. So I thought, what's the best way of using the time? So I sat down to write a book about my experiences. I guess the first key thing is that if you want to raise investment, then you have to be able to excite people. You have to come up with a proposition that's going to excite, and people will say, well, people will invest in dull, boring businesses. And people do invest in dull, boring businesses, and they probably make money. But people would, I think, rather find something that's a bit more exciting than a dull, boring business, because they can put their money into stocks, shares, bonds, gilts, whatever caters for the dull stuff. And we are risk seeking animals. We do crazy things, just because we enjoy the risk, bungee jumping and Formula One car racing and swimming with sharks,
Or sometimes starting a business.
or starting a business. So I wrote something early on in the book, and I'm just going to read you this little section here, which I think covers it quite well. It says, let me tell you about the circus. You are the performers, investors pack the crowd. They sit through 10-minute acts, performing poodles, a bare-chested fire eater, clowns throwing buckets of confetti over each other. But what do they really want? They want to see the high wire act, ideally with no safety net. Because that's the headline act, that's what excites them. Ask any kid if they want to ride a tricycle or be a trapeze artist, and you'll have your answer.
Yeah, it's a circus after all. And it's so true, because in one of the pitching session that we have with the founders, and one of our advisor came on board, also happens to be an investor in Web3 and crypto projects. He did mention to one of our founder clients that I almost witnessed that when you were talking about traction, the tone and the energy almost died out. So you were like, so we have done like $100 million in deposits, and $4 million in revenues. So why is that? Why? I mean, when you're talking about the traction, you have to be excited about what you have achieved.
Yeah.
And if you're not excited about what you have achieved, how exactly are going to make others feel excited about what you have achieved and where you
Mm.
exactly are going? So I completely resonate with the fact that, there has to be conviction and there has to be some sort of transfer of energy from one person to another, be it form of you being really passionate storyteller or you really bragging about the traction and the vision that you're about to achieve.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Makes sense. Perfect. So, the other thing that I also wanted to discuss is that sometimes, and I say this because recently I'm actually, in fact, making a post about this. There's one
Mm.
startup which actually raised capital, which does race competition of sperms, right? So they actually raised $1 million. My question to you is that when businesses like these are actually raising capital, why are great ideas or founders with great ideas or some sort of traction are not able to get funded?
Right. I think it's really difficult, and it's this the whole kind of go to market distribution thing. Sometimes just. I mean, I can think of several founders that I'm working with at the moment that I believe have got great ideas, and I introduce them to, say, angel groups, and an angel group will say, however good we think the idea is, it doesn't fit our thesis. We are dedicated to deep tech with a whole basket of IP and so on. So there's no point coming along and talking to us about this other idea that, our group only wants this. You go to another group, they only want SaaS. You go to another group, they only want fintech or whatever. Many investors have kind of, corralled around a certain theme, a certain idea, and they don't want to look at anything else. Then you do find, that there are investors, and I'm possibly one myself, don't have such a narrow kind of view as to what they will invest in. They will invest in people and story and something that resonates with them. But then it's a real challenge finding them, because most investors don't, post on LinkedIn, I'm looking to invest in this kind of business, because they just can't cope with the avalanche of stuff that they get, if they did. So you're looking for ways of finding the kind of people that you want. And usually those ways are not through, here's a list of 1,000 active investors and you sort of pitch bomb them all. Well, that mostly doesn't work. You're looking for introductions to people that come through a network that you've built up over a period of time. And I find one of the most effective things to do is you talk to an investor and you say, and they're not interested, don't say, can you introduce me to anyone else in your network? Because then you're giving them that risk of social capital, of, introducing them to somebody that might fail, quite possibly will fail. But just to say, can you name anybody that I should talk to? I don't want an introduction. I just want someone to follow, someone that I can do the work of connecting myself, but I just want to know who they are. So you're not asking for a warm introduction, because you probably won't get it, but you're getting a lead from somebody. And then you can go back to the person and say, yesterday I was talking to Jamal. You don't say he gave me a warm introduction, because you didn't, but you can say just that he mentioned you.
Interesting. And I also came across one of your recent social media posts where I believe you took a screenshot of a founder who reached out to you, hey, Mr. Phil, looking for, I believe, $25,000 or $50,000.
Mm.
Something that you can give. So I really want to understand that, and there have been different thoughts around how to reach out to investors through warm introductions and all that stuff. But sometimes founders with great business, great product, great ideas, and they themselves being great, do not have the luxury of this wide network that they can usually tap
No.
on. So in that case, what's the best way to reach out to investors like you or any investors per se?
I think you're pointing to something that's really challenging for most investors. They do not come from an affluent background. They don't have money behind them. They come up with a good idea. They get quite impatient about, wanting to act on it. They want to see something in the market. They don't spend any time trying to create what people might call a war chest, the amount of money they might need to survive for a year or so whilst they're trying to build their idea. And many founders just get too impatient at the beginning to try to get out into the market, often without any financial backing or even without having reasonably validated, the need for a product in the market. Sad though it is, sometimes founders bring their problems upon themselves because of their lack of preparation. So I tend to refer people to angel groups, because angel groups and funds, EIS funds, SEIS funds, because it doesn't pose any great risk to me or my social capital. It's not a one-on-one referral. It's not a warm introduction. And then the fund or the angel group makes a decision themselves. They look at the pitch deck, they have a quick interview with the founder, and they say, well, yeah, you can pitch to our group or you don't pitch to our group. And, if you do that enough times, you can pitch to 6, 8, 10, 12 different groups of people. You'll be getting some feedback back about, whether your idea is worth pursuing or not.
Got it. And how do we, or how would a typical founder or very normal founder break into these groups? Like, do we go towards email outreach, personalizing our outreach? What exactly is the best way?
I think if you want a pitch to a group, then in the UK, they're all listed by the UK British Business Angels Association. I think you can find a lot of groups listed on their website, and they're in different geographical locations. Some are not geographically tied; they're just all online. And there are female only groups like Alma Angels, for example. You can pitch to them if you're female. And there are a few other groups that will support underrepresented groups or females, not just everybody, if you like. So and then I think there is a real challenge in how if you don't go through a group, if you're going to try and approach individual investors, there is a challenge, I think, in terms of how you personalize the approach that you make to them, because I get so many direct messages on LinkedIn from people all over the world, probably 2 or 3 a day, who have made no effort whatsoever to find out anything about me at all. Sometimes they even get my gender wrong, which I think is, which is bizarre. I got an email last week saying, would you join our group of 100 female angels supporting a female-led startup? And I thought, I'm a man.
Most probably not the best way to reach out.
Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. So one last question. You do work with founders. You have, you do advise them on a couple of different things. So walk us through that. If any, number one, what sort of founders do you typically work with, and what sort of challenges are they facing, and what exactly is your typical work with them?
I try to work with people on a longer term basis. I'm not, as opposed to a kind of consultancy model. People go to a consultant and they say what their problem is, and then they get a solution, and that's like the end of the arrangement. So I try to work on a kind of accountability partnering type basis, where people come with particular challenges. We have one meeting, we talk about their challenges and we make a plan, and then we each go away with some actions that we've got to follow, and then we agree to meet again in a couple of weeks or a month, and then we review how they got on, what obstacles they've met, any thoughts about how they could overcome those obstacles, and begin to make a plan for the next time we meet, so that we get into this kind of cyclical approach to working together. And sometimes that's around fundraising, and sometimes it's more it gets into the detail of pitch deck design, what goes on slide 1, slide 2, slide 3, and the whole kind of thing. But sometimes it's more broader in terms of execution, what you need to do. How do you do the relentless thing that is execution? What's required of you day to day, almost? Whenever you wake up, how do you structure your day, and how do you make sure there's something in your day that's actually going to involve trying to sell something? That might involve talking to customers, refining the need based on customer feedback, and so on.
Interesting. And what's the best way to reach out to you to have a conversation around any of these challenges that founders are facing? LinkedIn or
on LinkedIn? I've also joined Hubble Social. Have you come across Hubble Social? So I'm listed on there. Yeah, I'm listed there, but either of those.
Got it. Interesting. Perfect. All right, Phil, appreciate the time. I believe there were very interesting topics that we have covered around founders' characteristics. How do we have this relentless drive of executing and then being self aware that whether you're going in the right direction or the wrong direction, and having the right
Yeah.
systems and people around you so that you move towards that phase. I really do appreciate you. And if anyone wants to have a conversation with Phil, I will drop down his LinkedIn and his Hubble link in the comment section or in
Yeah.
the description of the video so that you can reach out to Phil. And if you're looking for Phil to angel invest, the least thing that you can do is to make sure that you don't, name him as a female or a she, that is for sure. But really do appreciate you, Phil. And
Thank you for the opportunity to, share some of my thoughts on the startup world.
no, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure. All right, Phil. Thank you so much.
All right.